Welcome to the New Earth Entrepreneurs Podcast, where innovation meets sustainability. Building a better tomorrow today. We interview change makers and visionary leaders redefining success for the planet. Here you'll find inspiring stories and solutions that matter. Welcome to the New Earth Entrepreneurs.
Welcome to the New Earth Entrepreneur Show. Today's guest is Oliver Gunasekara. Thank you. CEO and co-founder of Impossible Metals. Oliver and his team are pioneering sustainable methods of deep-sea mining with cutting-edge robotics. Impossible Metals recently achieved a milestone by successfully testing Eureka II, an autonomous underwater robot that selectively harvests critical metals from the ocean floor without disturbing marine ecosystems. Today we'll learn more about Oliver's journey, the technology behind Eureka, and Impossible Metals' role in the clean energy future. Welcome, Oliver.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you again for being here. I'm definitely looking forward to diving into unintended Impossible Metals work and your vision for sustainable mining. If we could start with an overview, Impossible Metals takes a unique approach to deep sea mining. Can you tell us more about how the company was founded and what drives its mission to support clean energy?
Yeah, the company was founded in the fall of 2020. Basically, my realization after living here in the Bay Area was we had really bad wildfires and the sky went orange one day. And that was really the genesis of maybe I have one more startup in me. And after doing a lot of research, I kind of came to the conclusion that critical metals, the metal we need to electrify everything, is so important that we need good solutions to get these. And when I discovered what others were doing on the ocean floor using this dredging and riser technology, it really bothered me that it had been 50 years since the tech was invented and tested, but yet there's really not been much innovation. And so that was really the genesis to create Impossible Metals.
And your goal is to extract metals sustainably. Could you share how your approach, particularly with the Eureka robots, differs from traditional mining methods?
Yeah, to describe the traditional approach, and as I said, this was invented in the 60s and tested in the 70s. And it's a big collector tractor that gets lowered to the deep ocean floor, and then it injects water into the seabed and vacuums up everything through a long riser pump system. So it's literally kind of vacuuming the seabed floor. And so any life that happens to be in front of this collector machine will actually be destroyed. We felt there had to be a better way. And, this tech was tested a long time ago. But today we have very advanced computers, computer vision, AI, robotics. And so that was really the idea. Could we build a 21st century approach that used modern underwater robotics and AI that could selectively harvest the resource? So just to describe how our approach works, we use a parallel fleet of these robots that are called Eureka. The current version we've been testing is Eureka II. The next version, the production version, will be Eureka III. This vehicle is fully autonomous, so it's untethered, it's battery powered, and it gets launched by a ship. It uses its own buoyancy engine to dive to the deep seabed, but it does not land. It hovers about a meter or so above the seabed floor, and then it turns on its cameras and lights, and it looks at each of the nodules. And if we see visible life, then we don't disturb it. If we don't see visible life, we don't see a coral or a sponge, then we use an array of robotic arms to pick the nodules one by one as they lie just on the seabed floor. And they get picked into the vehicle, stored inside the vehicle. Once the vehicle's payload is full, the vehicle uses its own buoyancy engine to float to the surface. We have an automated crane where we recover the vehicle. We then empty the payload, we swap its battery for a new charged battery, and we do any maintenance, and then the vehicle can be reused.
Yeah, glad to hear of updates, especially for how long it's been utilized, and I'm sure there's a lot of negative impacts to the traditional methods of deep sea mining that you're avoiding and looking to improve upon. So appreciate hearing about this. In kind of these accomplishments realms, you successfully tested Eureka II in deep water, which is a major achievement. Could you explain how Eureka II operates and the technology behind selective harvesting, which actually you just did, but That's perfect. If you have anything else you want to add to it, but I've just got I like to make sure we cover all these details.
Yeah, I think I gave a high level the system, so yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, then my next question I have is that public perception, deep sea mining can be challenging due to the environmental concerns. How are you addressing these concerns and promoting a sustainable image for impossible metals?
Yeah, deep sea mining has a very bad reputation, even though the industry hasn't yet started. Have collectively, industry has spent the last few decades getting ready, getting the rules in place, doing the environmental baselining work, and production is likely to start in the next few years. But there is a large NGO community which are actively trying to stop the industry from starting. And they're concerned about, if you remove all of the nodules, what about the life that needs the nodules? What about the biodiversity that lives down there? What about the sediment disturbance and plumes that get generated? What about the noise and light pollution that is created by collection? What about the carbon emissions from the infrastructure? So those are primarily the concerns. For us and Impossible Metal, these were really the inputs we took on the design of our architecture. We knew what the others were doing with the dredging and riser system, and we basically took a blank sheet of paper and said, how could we break this problem into 3 areas? So the first area was the actual picking of the rocks, the nodules off the seabed floor. The second area is the movement from the seabed up and down the water column. That can be as much as 4 miles in depth. And then the third was how do you get the material onto the ship and to the port? And we iterated, we just experimented and brainstormed many different architectures. But ultimately, we evaluated them against 3 criteria: an environmental criteria, what impact would this have on the marine habitat, an economic impact, how expensive is this compared to alternatives, and thirdly, what about reliability? How many moving parts are there? Are there single points of failure? And that's what ultimately led to our approach. But just to summarize the hard surfaces, well, if we selectively harvest, if we don't remove everything, and in our latest economic model, we will leave about 30% of the nodules undisturbed, fly above them without disturbing them at all. That obviously preserves the habitat for life like a species of octopus that lays its eggs. The biodiversity, we know most of the biodiversity is actually in the seabed itself. It's the bacteria, and we don't disturb the seabed. We only remove the nodules, and again, only a selective portion. And so that really helps preserve the biodiversity. And if our AI and vision system sees a deep sea coral, we don't disturb it. Sediment plumes, well, we have gone to great lengths to completely minimize the sediment disturbance. Our vehicle is hovering, it's not using tracks, it's not injecting water. Now, there will be a little disturbance as we pick up, but we're trying to optimize to minimize that as much as possible. So we expect orders of magnitude less sediment disturbed than the dredging approach. And then when it comes to noise and vibration, and again, we have optimized our system to be very low. We don't need this particular technology that is required on ships by the dredging is differential positioning. This is big thrusters that keep the ship very, very still. We don't need that because our vehicles are untethered. There's no physical connection. And that thruster technology generates huge amounts of noise. And that noise is all at the surface. And that's where most of the big mammals like whales and dolphins live. And they are most impacted by noise. And then light. We only need light when we're actually picking, and we actually don't need a very high intensity light. And we're actually working with scientists to try to optimize what's the best wavelength that we could use that would have the minimum impact to the environment there. And then finally, we've committed to be net zero carbon emissions for all of our volume production. So we will either use clean energy or we will offset or capture the emissions that come from the charging of our robots and our shipping.
Amazing. Sounds like you all are covering your bases.
Yeah. As I said, the reputation is the biggest challenge for us, but we think our approach is quite different. We've really gone to great lengths to maintain the viability of the marine habitat whilst still extracting the critical metals we need to decarbonize our economies.
If anybody was going to be doing deep sea mining, I'm glad that it's you and Impossible Metals. That's you definitely are upholding to what I would consider great standards. Another, you mentioned that being one challenge, the kind of overcoming that public opinion or just all these different factors, but also another challenge, funding that can be a hurdle for emerging technology. You're working currently close to a Series A round to support the development of Eureka III. How are you navigating this fundraising process, and what milestones are you aiming for next?
Yeah, so we last raised a seed round about 2 and a bit years ago, May of 22. And that was, in total, we raised at that time about $12 million. And so with that money, we've built Eureka I and Eureka II. So Eureka I was a shallow water proof of concept. It had one of the arms. It had a small number of buoyancy engines and really proved the concept. Over the last year, 18 months, we've been working on Eureka II. It's a much larger vehicle. Maybe we can give a link to some images for the show notes that kind of show the Eureka II image. It's about the size of a small car. It can go as deep as 4 miles deep. It's fully autonomous. And so that's our major technical achievements that really we have achieved. In parallel, we're looking to partner with people that have mineral rights, and we're making some progress on that area as well. And so, we are hoping to convince investors that we've made great progress and there's a massive opportunity out there in the future.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Kind of boggles my mind to think about the technology Apple will be able to develop to be 4 miles deep down underwater. I want to continue to another challenge. Regulatory and environmental considerations are critical in your field. How do you approach working within these frameworks while advancing your technology?
Yeah, deep sea mining is highly regulated. There are 2 major jurisdictions. You're either within what's called the exclusive economic zone of a country. That's typically 200 miles off the coast. And that then means that any minerals in that area are the same as if they're on land for the country. So they're regulated exclusively by the country. And you see countries like the Cook Islands. It's a sovereign state near New Zealand, a huge area of the seabed because they have 15 islands. You see Japan, Brazil, Sweden, India, all actively initiating programs around licensing and regulating deep sea minerals within their own exclusive economic zone, their own offshore resource. But there are also minerals beyond the 200 miles, so-called the high seas or areas beyond national jurisdiction. This area is regulated by a UN law, so it's called the UN Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. It's a 1982 law, and it established a regulatory body called the International Seabed Authority, the ISA, headquartered in Jamaica. That authority is made up of 170 countries plus the EU, and that organization has already issued something like 31 exploration license areas. So these are areas you could see on a map, typically 75,000 square kilometers, where they give a company the right to do research and exploration work and environmental work as a precursor to commercial mining. And as I said, 31 of these areas have already been awarded. We expect that a number of companies are going to request the permission to do production mining in the next few years.
Okay. I hope it's y'all that secure a number of those. Again, just or anybody else adhering to such good principles of operating and being in such a wide and deep consideration of impact.
Yeah.
Looking forward, you mentioned scaling operations to support clean energy. Could you share your vision for how Impossible Metals could contribute to the future of renewable energy, particularly through sustainable sourcing of metals?
Yeah, the energy transition is a transition away from fossil fuels to primarily electricity. And electricity fundamentally requires metal. It needs metal to move the electricity in the form of infrastructure, but it also needs metals in the form of batteries to store the energy. And so if you look at a traditional gas-powered vehicle, a so-called internal combustion engine car, versus an electric vehicle, you see there's something like 5 times more metal in the electric vehicle because of the battery and more wiring, etc. So the world desperately needs massive amounts of these metals, and today we tend to get them primarily from places like Africa and Indonesia. That's where we do a lot of this mining, and environmentally and socially it's not particularly great. If we talk about nickel is one of the most important ingredients in EV batteries. It is also used in stainless steel, but the world's majority of nickel today comes from Indonesia, but it is unfortunately directly below the rainforest. So you have to deforest large areas of land to get at the nickel laterite ore that is below. And then you have to process that ore. The processing is pretty bad. It uses a technology called HPAL, high pressure acid leaching, and it involves grinding and then roasting and pressurizing and then actually using a lot of sulfuric acid to actually leach the metal out. And unfortunately, this acid then has to be dealt with. And historically, it was dumped in the ocean. Nowadays, they don't do that, but they dry stack it. But as soon as there is a seismic, an earthquake, or there's a huge tsunami, there's a lot of rain, all of this can leak. And so you hear these stories about all of the fishing stocks being depleted, or the water being polluted. You also hear about people being forced off their land, because unfortunately there is a fair amount of corruption where soldiers can come, people can bribe the officials, soldiers turn up, and suddenly that village that has been there forever is forced to relocate because it's now a mine. And that's Indonesia. If we talk about Africa, cobalt, another very important metal for the energy transition, used a lot in small quantities, but in batteries. It really helps the stability and the life of the battery. Most of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC. And unfortunately, there are very well documented cases of child labor and forced labor happening in the DRC. And in fact, there are a lot of injuries and death. It's not uncommon for people in the DRC to be paid $1 to $2 a day to actually do the mining by hand. And of course, that leads to lots of injuries and deaths. And so all of these are how we source our metals today. We think there's got to be a better way, to go to the ocean with new technology where there is a fraction of the life that there is in a rainforest, and we know nobody lives there. And so that's our approach. And we also think that the economics of deep sea mining, because you have 4 metals in one, you just have to pick up and you get to reuse ships and ports, will ultimately mean that our cost base will be less than these other locations. So in time, we will start to displace and stop new mines opening in places like Africa and Indonesia.
The breadth of impact that sourcing metals and the various impacts, from everything y'all are considering, from impacts to the marine life to all of these different kinds of impacts that happen from the other ways that these materials are sourced. Again, it's just boosting my appreciation for the way y'all are considering going about things, and that y'all are even here working as you are. So thank you for that. And looking forward with Eureka III. And future AUVs, how do you see, or what role do you see them playing in global transition to sustainable mining?
Well, I think in time, our cost base is going to be so good and the size of the resource in the ocean is so large that we will replace new mines for nickel and cobalt. So instead of having to go to Indonesia or Africa for the new capacity that we need to electrify everything, we'll be able to leverage deep sea minerals. And, there are reports out there that we need thousands of new mines to open between now and 2050. So there's just a huge amount of environmental and social disruption that would happen on land. And in longer term, we can use circularity and recycling. The beauty of these metals, unlike fossil fuels, is that they're infinitely recyclable. So there will be a time when a large proportion of demand can be supplied through recycling and second use of primary material. But it just takes a long time. If you buy a new EV today, you're probably going to keep it, the car will survive for at least 10 to 15 years. And then it's possible the battery could even be reused. So you're looking at between 15 and 20 or maybe even 25 years before that metal is available for recycling. So we need huge amounts of mining for the next few decades, and then we'll be able to augment the mining with recycled materials.
Glad to hear about the recyclability of the metals. As Impossible Metals continues to expand, are there specific resources, partnerships, or collaborations that would help accelerate your progress?
After we close our Series A, we are looking for a manufacturing partner. So we will ultimately going to need hundreds of these Eureka robots, AUVs, to be manufactured and deployed in time. Obviously, we'll start a deployment with, say, 10, but over years, we would grow that to meet demand. And we're not a specialized manufacturing company, so we can build 1 and 2, we can test, but ultimately we'd like to outsource that to a company that has experience in building subsea technologies. Maybe they have shipping experience, submarine experience, underwater robot experience. So that's one key partnership that we're looking for. I can name 2 others. We are also looking for a shipping partner. We will need a significant amount of ships to actually transport the ore. We have designed a unique launch and recovery system, an automated crane that we would retrofit to a bulk carrier or a shipping container vessel, but ultimately would like to partner with those companies and provide value to both. And then thirdly, the ore that we pick up, these polymetallic nodules, they still have to be processed. The metal is inside, but there's also other things that are not as valuable. And so that is called refining. We don't intend to do that ourselves. We will use a tolling relationship where we will deliver the raw nodules, the ore, to a company that has expertise. They will actually do the processing and give us back the high quality metal that we can then sell into the EV supply chain.
So if any of our listeners out there, at any of those, hopefully, or know of anyone, also curious, what kinds of clients or collaborators are you hoping to work with as you advance Impossible Metals' mission?
So we've already started to have some discussions with some of the larger automotive companies around offtake, around providing the high quality nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese for them to use in their products. I think some of the battery vendors and some of the traditional automotive companies that are beginning to put more focus on electric vehicles is a good fit. And we also think this is a good strategy for financing that deployment, because we have our Series A, which will build 1 of the Eureka III, but 1 is not sufficient. We need a fleet of Eurekas to go into production. And so instead of taking equity or debt financing, we would much rather do offtake style financing, where maybe we deliver the metal a few years ahead of time to the customer. They pay today, but they pay at a discount, and we use that capital to build out the fleet.
Finally, I'm curious, what excites you most about the future of sustainable deep sea mining and the impact of your work?
I think it's the impact it can make on the planet. All mining practices in Africa, in Indonesia, the rainforest, the biodiversity, the environment that's being chopped down, and the human impacts is probably the one that I worry the most about and think we can have the biggest impact. There are often indigenous people that are being trampled upon by mining companies and their partners. And, I think we have an opportunity to avoid for that to happen and potentially even provide some financial compensation. So there's, one of the things I really love about the UN body is that they've designated the high seas, international waters, as the benefits of all humanity. It shouldn't only belong to one country. And so there will be a royalty on the nodules that are collected, the value of them, as is normal in mining. Normally it goes to the government and they take the royalty, but in the case it's the UN body. So what they are working on is how to spend that royalty, and they're looking at compensating countries that are being affected by climate change. I wrote a blog post about what if we could pay people in Africa instead of having to go into a mine and get $1 to $2 a day. What if you went into a school and you got paid to go to school, and we use the deep sea mining royalty to fund that. I think that would be wonderful to make possible.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I like to check too to see if there's anything that I might have missed, either just general topic or anything specific before we wrap up on our episode here.
I don't think so. I think it's, the world needs these metals. There really isn't any alternative. And there's plenty of data from IEA and World Bank and others. So we've got to get this metal from somewhere. The demand is accelerating as we try to transition away from carbon intensive energy sources. So we absolutely need these metals. There isn't really any substitution. Recycling won't move the needle. The choice is more disruption in places like Africa and Indonesia, more human suffering, or go to a place on the ocean that has very, very little life today and use very advanced technology like the Eureka robots to detect what life is there and preserve it even further. In fact, in our latest economic model, we're proposing to not disturb 30% of all of the material on the seabed. So our vehicle will detect the life and additional space and just fly over the top and leave it completely undisturbed.
It's like when you've been talking both about the traditional mining methods and then again the practices that y'all are improving upon. The visual I get is almost like a real life Avatar movie of some of those extracting those materials in a way that aren't taking into consideration the human, the plant, the animal life. So again, I'm just feeling a lot of appreciation to get to learn about you and Impossible Metals. Appreciate the insights that you're sharing, and I'm excited to see how Impossible Metals shapes the future of clean energy.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful.